Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the Niagara Falls Review. Following that at midnight, we have the USA Today Weekend Edition rebroadcast from Friday's broadcast. Stay with us for these readings and more throughout the rest of your evening. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Jean, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the February 18th, 2026 issue of the Niagara Falls Review on Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Niagara is no longer such a white space. Black population surge brings diversity and challenges to region, by Alan Benner. When Narayana Kapasavanu moved to Niagara in 2011, it was unusual to meet someone who looked like her, she recalls. The Zimbabwe native was one of 6,340 Niagara residents who identified as Black that year, according to Statistics Canada's census data. By 2021, Niagara's Black population had more than doubled to 12,785. Gone are the days when I would go to Walmart and not meet anybody who looks like me or walk into a restaurant. It would be a novelty, she said. Now you definitely see a lot more people that look like me and other cultures too and other races. Oh my goodness, I've definitely seen the changes. And they're still coming from all over the world, hoping to build new lives in a welcoming and increasingly diverse region, said Bridges Niagara Executive Director Marie Mordecadian. Mordecadian said the St. Catharines-based agency that assists people emigrating to the region is seeing a steady increase in Black residents choosing Niagara as their home, whether as permanent residents, protected persons, international students, or individuals. This growth strengthens our region socially, culturally, and economically, she says. Kasabavahu said people are moving here because of the uncertainty and the hurt and the hate and the unkindness that's happening around the world. They come here to find that solace from hate, but we've got, on a global scale, so much more political unrest and natural disasters all over the world now more than ever. I keep saying this pendulum keeps swinging from one extreme to the other, she said. Moracadian said Bridges Niagara is part of a welcoming ecosystem, offering the solace immigrants are hoping to find. Our focus remains on ensuring newcomers feel supported, connected, and empowered as they build their lives in Niagara. Niagara communities seem open and ready to continue embracing demographic change, Moracadian said, adding it's apparent in the greater awareness of the culturally responsive services and inclusive practices. While growth always requires intentional effort, the overall direction of our region is one of openness, collaboration, and opportunity, she said. Kapasavanu, founder and executive director of TOES Niagara, Tools of Empowerment for Success, said the changing demographic is also evident in the growing client lists for Niagara-based programs such as hers that help Black people transition to their new homes in Niagara, as well as in the schools TOES works with, including St. Catharines University. There's definitely a marked increase in the number of students. I mean, to a point where Brock University had to actually come up with a Center for Excellence for Black students because the number had significantly increased, she said. And you see it in the high schools as well. The numbers have gone up. Tabo Chimgana, founder and executive director of Future Black Female, said she too is seeing significant growth in Niagara's Black population. While another census will be taking place in May, she said the region's Black population has likely already surpassed 20,000 residents. Jim Ghana said Future Black Female client list has tripled in the 7 years since it was founded, with more than 300 people now being served in the programs it offers. There's definitely a substantial growth in our engagement with Black youth, and that's across Niagara region, she said. All 16 district school board of Niagara Secondary Schools, she said, have established Black youth associations. The student-led organizations provide advocacy, cultural training, and other programs. Meanwhile, Niagara Catholic District School Board is encouraging the formation of Black student-led cultural clubs and affinity groups, said spokesperson Jennifer Pellegrini. She said Niagara Catholic signed a memorandum of understanding with Future Black Female a few years ago. Demographics have shifted across Niagara region as families move into the area, either from larger centers or as newcomers to Canada, Pellegrini said in an email. This diversity is increasingly represented in our Niagara Catholic schools and is celebrated during the school year. We will continue to encourage principals, staff, and student leaders to promote this opportunity to become change makers in their schools and communities. Chimgana said immigration is driving the changing demographics in Niagara and across the country. While about 40% of Canada's Black population was born here, Statistics Canada data shows numbers are being bolstered by newcomers from Haiti, Nigeria, Jamaica, Cameroon, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. That includes a lot of refugees and asylum seekers who have been sent to Niagara over the past few years to be housed here, Chimgana said. We know that there's colleges and universities, and even with the University of Niagara Falls, Canada, they bring in a lot of international students as well. The demographic is really changing around Niagara. She said anti-immigration rhetoric in the United States may also be accelerating change. I think for a long time, the world was sold on this idea of an American dream, and now I think there's a Canadian dream, Chimgana said. This Canadian dream, if we don't manage our race relations, our immigration, and even our economy better, the risk is it ends up like the American dream, which is a lie. While there are still challenges, Chimgana said changing demographics are leading to a greater awareness and understanding of other races and cultures. I think people are starting to acknowledge that, not notice it, but actually acknowledge that maybe Niagara is not such a white space and that we need to think of things differently and look at things differently, be more inclusive, and celebrate the fact that there's now more diversity in the region, she said. Like we now celebrate the Holy Festival of Color, for example, in St. Catharines. So there's more Indian restaurants, there's more Black restaurants. We're really seeing even a diversity in our shopping experiences. And I think that starts when people stop thinking about Niagara as a white space. Kepasenavahu said something Niagara should be celebrating. Change is great. It's not always a bad thing. And with this change in demographics and the increase of Black population, it tells us that Niagara is evolving, which is normal and healthy, right? It's part of growth, said the vice chair of Niagara Regional Police Board. The problem comes when people see demographic change as disruption. I think it has to be seen as a signal to institutions, services, individuals, public spaces that the way things have always been done may no longer serve everyone equally, and that we have to adapt and change to make sure that everybody feels engaged, they feel safe, and that they're part of the community. Solutions, not symbolism, needed to combat homelessness. Niagara Falls City Council pushes forward its proposed Unhoused Action Plan by Ray Spiteri. Niagara Falls is staying focused on creating an unhoused action plan rather than joining a call for the province to declare a state of emergency for homelessness, mental health, and addiction. Even when we did it, it was more symbolic than anything, said Mayor Jim Diodati in an interview after Tuesday's council meeting. A resolution from Thorold City Council, which formally requested Premier Doug Ford to declare an Ontario-wide emergency, was received for information. It didn't really do anything, Diodati said when the Niagara Falls declared its state of emergency in 2022. Anything that draws awareness is good. But I think everybody is aware today. They don't want to hear about the problem. They want to hear about what the solution is, and I think that's what we're doing. We've taken a lead. A new action plan was requested by Niagara Falls City councilors during their October 7th meeting. It calls for a more coordinated response to challenges related to homelessness, hunger, public drug use, and disruptive behavior in public spaces. While current efforts focus largely on maintenance, cleanup, public safety, and other reactive measures, a new action plan intends to align them into a more comprehensive, mission-driven framework. Ken Todd, the city's retired chief administrative officer, was tasked to lead the plan, which continues to go through public consultation. All collected input will inform recommendations presented to City Council by June. The mayors of Ontario's 29 largest cities have called for a provincial state of emergency as municipalities deal with what they call a community safety and humanitarian crisis created by homelessness, mental health, and addiction. Last December, Ontario big city mayors urged the province to provide more funding and engage more actively with cities and other stakeholders. Councillor Lori Lococo said if the province declared a state of emergency, it might enable it to unlock additional funds, but she doesn't believe more money is the answer. There needs to be solutions, and we haven't really figured out what the right solutions are, she said. There are many municipalities that want to support this request to the province, but I don't want to just support it to support it. I want it to mean something. Chief Administrative Officer Jason Burgess said when provincial state emergency is enacted, certain approvals can be fast-tracked. But he questioned whether homelessness, mental health, and addiction would meet the criteria to be declared an emergency by the province. It's hard to say it's a state of emergency when it's developed over 12 or 15 years. Diodati said a state of emergencies are typically more designed for natural disasters such as tornadoes, hurricanes, and earthquakes, not ones that are slowly developing. What Ken Todd's doing, I think that's a more productive, constructive approach, he said. I don't think more money is the answer. It's how we spend the money. It's where we spend the money. Councillor Mona Patel said local Niagara municipalities declared their own state of emergency several years ago, including Niagara region, but questioned whether anything outside of awareness really came out of it. Patel says she doesn't believe the province making a declaration will solve anything either. The problem is deeper, she said, pointing to a cycle that can start from a person losing their job, becoming addicted to alcohol and drugs, and ending up on the streets. I think they need to address the root cause, and I think the root cause is job losses. Hopefully, provincial and federal governments start helping people who are on the verge of homelessness and help them to not become homeless, because we will never get to the finish line if the goalpost keeps on moving. Industry protection sought against encroaching residential areas. How do we have a win-win instead of a win-lose? By Ray Spiteri. Niagara Falls City Council is asking the province to enact protections for industry against complaints from surrounding residential development. Councillors unanimously approved sending a letter to Premier Doug Ford and relative provincial ministries requesting more support that would allow pre-existing manufacturing properties to operate in a way that would avoid conflict with newer nearby neighborhoods. We have to protect industry's rights at the same time as encouraging residential development if industry is pre-established in the area, Councillor Ruth Ann Ness-Westing said during a council's recent meeting. Concerns about separate residential development proposals near industrial properties, Palfinger and Oleo Energies, Inc., featured prominently during a council meeting in January. During that meeting, local politicians heard from company representatives, along with Ken Skoltens of Niagara Industrial Association, who said residential encroachment near manufacturing sites has been an issue across the region. He said when residents move into areas near industrial operations and complain to the environmental ministry about issues related to operations, it's dependent on the pre-existing industry to address those, which can be costly. Newestig said most recently that has and could continue to lead to local industrial businesses saying, we aren't making a profit here, so perhaps we'll just leave and go somewhere else, which means that we're going to lose jobs. Newestig said she raised the topic with environmental minister, who indicated the province is looking at legislation that would protect key economic sectors from encroaching residential developments across Ontario. Councillor Lori Lococo brought up several notification and communication issues that were included in Newestig's motion to approach the provincial government, which was unanimously approved. For example, Lococo said it's important for there to be broader notification about development proposals near industrial properties, and for municipal staff, developer consultants, and nearby businesses to better communicate information about the industry's classification, which really determines the distance where residents can be placed by these industrial manufacturing companies. Mayor Jim Diodati said he reached out to the Premier's office to express concerns, adding, "Our Economic Development Department works so hard to bring these jobs in, and to know they can be lost with a complaint. We've got more houses, we need protection for the jobs," said Diodati. When someone complains about the smell or the noise, they shouldn't get charged right away and want to leave. He said Ford talked to various ministries and the provincial government is proposing legislation to deal with the matter. He also mentioned to me some other cities, specifically where they're having the exact same problem, said Diodati. "We want to build more houses, but we don't want to lose jobs. So how do we win-win instead of win-lose?" He understood it, got on it right away, but I think it's a good motion that helps push this forward because you want to welcome the development, not be upset by it. Councillor Victor Pietraglia said he believes the disconnect has to do with ministry-imposed setbacks. Sometimes you find a situation where a developer comes in and says, "Well, I'm outside of those setbacks," but that doesn't stop the ministry from going out and investigating complaints, he said. I think that the ministry needs to take the stance that they're going to support industry more and say, "Well, the industry was here, you knew what you were getting into. Even though you're more than far enough away, there's always going to be a little bit of noise or there's always going to be a little bit of smell. There are certain situations where it's not necessarily the industry that's creating it. It's not necessarily the setback. But I'd like to see the world where the ministry actually supports industry more as opposed to coming in and imposing fines." You are listening to a reading of articles and features from Niagara Falls Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Canadian skaters speed to another golden moment. Maltais, Blondin, and Weideman defend their 2022 Beijing Olympic title. Canada's speed skaters won their second straight gold medal in women's team pursuit Tuesday, successfully defending their 2022 Beijing Olympic title with a come-from-behind victory at the Milan Cortina Games. Valerie Maltais, Ivany Blondin, and Isabel Weideman defeated the Netherlands in the final to top the podium for the second straight games. "I did feel we were skating really powerfully. We were together the whole time," Weideman said. "We were executing really well. When we had 2 laps to go, I was like, oh yeah, this is a good one." The win marks the first time since 2010 that a country has earned the top spot at back-to-back Olympics. The Canadians trailed the Dutch early, but surged into the lead in the back half of the race and won in 2 minutes, 55.81 seconds. Blondin said coming into the race as defending champions was an honor. "It's the same team. There's some sense every single time we go to the line that we're calm, collected, in one unit," she said. "That's very powerful. It gives us a lot of confidence going into every single race." It was Canada's 12th medal at the Games and 3rd gold. It's also a 4th career medal for Maltais and her second at this Olympics after a bronze in the 3,000 meters. Weideman also has 4 medals after winning 3 in Beijing, while Blondin now has 3, including 2 golds. Canada held practice ahead of its men's hockey quarterfinal, with forwards Nathan McKinnon and Sam Bennett absent for what head coach John Cooper called maintenance. McKinnon took a forearm to the jaw in Sunday's 10-2 win over France, and was also on the receiving end of a knee-on-knee hit late in the game. Cooper said there is no panic ahead of Wednesday's elimination game against Czechia. "He's a bull," Cooper said Tuesday of a player he's put with Connor McDavid and Macklin Celebrini to create an ultra-talented line partway through the last two contests. To have that much power, strength, and skill, it's a rarity, but he's a gamer, that kid. Defenseman Josh Morrissey was a full participant after missing 2 games, while veteran forward Brad Marchand is available after sitting out 2 final preliminary contests. Snow and poor visibility in the Italian Alps forced Milan Cortina organizers to postpone the women's snowboard slopestyle final and freestyle aerials qualification in Lavagna. Laurie Bluin and Juliette Pelchat will have to wait for an extra day for the women's slopestyle final after it was postponed from Tuesday to Wednesday. Bluin, the 2018 Olympic silver medalist, is chasing another podium, while Pelchat advanced in her Olympic debut. The women's and men's aerial qualifying sessions were also delayed and are now set for Wednesday and Thursday respectively, with both finals on Thursday. Ottawa faces calls to send fuel to Cuba amid U.S. oil blockade. Prime Minister Mark Carney is facing mounting calls to speak out against the United States for widening its restrictions on fuel reaching Cuba or send aid to the country. For more than a year, Global Affairs Canada has warned travelers of shortages of basic necessities, including food, medicine, and fuel, across most of Cuba. In January, the island lost its main source of fuel when the U.S. took control of Venezuela's oil reserves. Canadian Airlines have suspended flights to the island, citing fuel shortages, while carriers like Air France have added a refuel stop in nearby countries. U.S. President Donald Trump has also threatened tariffs on any country selling or providing oil to Cuba, prompting the island to ration energy in recent days. The restrictions add to decades of American restrictions on goods and services in Cuba, an embargo that Canada has never replicated. Some within the Trump administration, such as Secretary of State Marco Rubio, have long called for regime change in Cuba, and they've warned Havana of possible military actions following the U.S. raid on Caracas that led to the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Mexico has sent Navy ships carrying food staples and personal hygiene items to Cuba, and the New Democrats say Canada should follow suit. Last week in the House of Commons, NDP interim leader Don Davies urged the government to support Cuba in the face of aggressive U.S. imperialism, arguing this would give heft to Carney's speech at the World Economic Forum that urged middle powers to stand up to intimidation by superpowers. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand did not say whether Canada would speak out against Washington or offer fuel or humanitarian aid. She instead noted efforts to support Canadians in need, including to leave the country. "We are deeply concerned by the deteriorating conditions in Cuba," she said. "Our top priority will always be the safety and security of Canadians, and our foreign policy is based on that." Prime Minister unveils new plan to build up domestic defense sector. Ambitious $6.6 billion strategy includes pledge of 125,000 jobs over the next decade. By Kyle Dugan. Canada has failed both to adequately fund its military and to build up the domestic defense industry, Prime Minister Mark Carney said Tuesday as he rolled out an ambitious new plan to grow the defense sector. Canada's first ever defense industrial strategy, unveiled Tuesday by Carney in Montreal, sets new guidance on procurement and funding decisions, looks to hike Canada's firm's share of federal defense contracts to 70%, and vows to add 125,000 defense sector jobs over the next decade. Over the last few decades, Canada has neither spent enough on defense nor invested enough in our defense industries, and we have relied too heavily on our geography and other countries to protect us, Carney said. This has created vulnerabilities that we can no longer afford and dependencies we can no longer sustain. The $6.6 billion plan, which bills itself as a paradigm shift for how government engages with industry, will prioritize building military gear domestically, especially to cover sovereign capabilities, critical to national defense or Canada's commitments to allies. If Ottawa cannot build at home, it will partner with allies or buy directly from them under strong conditions that spur reinvestment into the Canadian economy, the strategy document says. The strategy warns of a need to mitigate the risk of Canada getting locked into advanced military systems owned and controlled by foreign governments that can exert control over their intellectual property. Kristen Cianfarani, president of the Canadian Association of Defense and Security Industries, called the introduction of the Defense Industrial Strategy a historic turning point. For the first time, we can see clear, accountable vision for the defense sector that comes with specific targets to grow Canada's sovereign industrial capabilities, she said. The document states that Ottawa will select certain Canadian defense firms as key strategic partners and enter into formal partnerships with them to build world-leading champions that can meet Canada's needs. The strategy seeks to increase Canada's defense exports by 50% within a decade, just as the European Union looks to massively scale up defense spending in response to Russia's war on Ukraine. We will be very deliberate and open in terms of defense and security partnerships we sign with allies throughout the world and what opportunities that opens up, and be clear about what the guardrails are around the types of exports we would envision with those countries, Carney said. We will be broadening our partnerships. We're deepening with our closest allies. The document also promises a suite of policy shifts to come, such as planned legislative changes to the new Defense Investment Agency to make it an independent office. The agency is currently housed within Public Service and Procurement with a staff complement of just 85 people, which is set to expand to roughly 400. But the strategy cautions that even with more efficient defense procurement, Canadian companies will still need to engage with multiple agencies. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre dismissed the document as a salad bowl of buzzwords and called on Ottawa to instead cut bureaucracy and streamline its purchasing decisions. The government pledges in the document to advance a package of reforms early this year to its industrial technological benefits policy, which sets out how procurement projects get graded in terms of how they contribute to the domestic economy. It promises a new strategy on expanding production of critical minerals tied to defense and the creation of new programs to support domestic production of ammunition and explosives. The strategy said by 2029, Ottawa will stand up a new plant to produce nitrocellulose, which is a propellant used in munitions. Also on Tuesday, the government set a new serviceability targets for its fleets, the percentage of military vehicles ready to be deployed. The government set deployment-ready targets of 75% for the maritime fleet, 80% for land vehicles, and 85% for aerospace. Targets that the national defense officials call ambitious but achievable. According to the publicly released figures from National Defense, the last reported serviceability levels were 59.6% for the maritime fleet, 51% for land vehicles, and 42.3% for aerospace. The department cited personnel shortages, past underfunding, aging vehicles, and other supply chain issues as factors affecting the availability of military platforms. Ford defends decision to cut post-secondary grants by Liam Casey. Ontario Premier Doug Ford defended his government's decision to cut back on the amount of financial assistance for post-secondary students after he said thousands reached out to him over the Family Day weekend to voice their concerns. Starting this fall, the Ontario Student Assistant Program will lean more heavily on loans as opposed to grants, which are not repaid and are given out on a needs basis. Last week, the provincial government announced it would give colleges and universities a funding boost of $6.4 billion over 4 years and lift a 7-year tuition freeze. As part of that announcement, Colleges and Universities Minister Nolan Quinn said the makeup of the assistance program would change. The current proportion is about 85% grants to 15% loans, which will change this fall when students will receive a maximum of 25% of OSAP funding as grants. The loans remain interest-free until 6 months after graduation, when repayments begin. Ford said the current OSAP situation was not sustainable. I'm always saying we have the brightest and best students and best colleges and universities in the world, but when you're in the hole $2.5 billion, it wasn't realistic, he said Tuesday. He added that he was under massive pressure from the heads of universities to reverse course on the province's tuition freeze. I want to remind a lot of students that I fought for them for 7.5 years, not letting universities and colleges raise tuition, Ford said. Ontario is now allowing colleges and universities to raise fees by up to 2% per year for the next 3 years. After that, tuition increases will be capped at 2% or the inflation rate, whichever is lower. Students have widely condemned the province's moves. They say they will be left with more debt, while many others will simply be driven out of post-secondary education because it's unaffordable. The problems with the post-secondary sector are partially the provincial government's own making. Ford cut tuition 10% across the board in 2019 and froze it there. But he did not freeze tuition for international students who were charged significantly higher sums. Ontario colleges have already cut $1.4 billion in costs, suspended more than 600 programs, and eliminated more than 8,000 staff positions in a bid to save money. Both colleges and universities have welcomed the financial relief. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from Niagara Falls Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. U.S. strikes alleged drug boats killing 11 by Ben Finley and Konstantin Toropin. The U.S. military said Tuesday that it carried out strikes on 3 boats accused of smuggling drugs in Latin American waters, killing 11 people in one of the deadliest days of the Trump administration's months-long campaign against alleged traffickers. The series of strikes conducted Monday brought the death toll to at least 145 people since the administration began targeting those it calls narco-terrorists in small vessels since early September. Like most of the military's statements on the 42 known strikes, U.S. Southern Command said it targeted alleged drug traffickers along known smuggling routes. It said 2 vessels carrying 4 people each were struck in the eastern Pacific Ocean, while a third boat with 3 people in it was hit in the Caribbean Sea. The military did not provide evidence that the vessels were ferrying drugs, but posted videos on X that showed the boats being destroyed. The videos posted by Southern Command show the boats either moving or bobbing in the water before the explosions engulf them in flames. People can be seen sitting in 2 of the small open vessels before they're destroyed. President Donald Trump has said that the U.S. is in, quote, armed conflict with cartels in Latin America and has justified the attacks as a necessary escalation to stem the flow of drugs. Critics have questioned the overall legality of the strikes, as well as their effectiveness, in part because the fentanyl behind many fatal overdoses is typically trafficked to the U.S. overland from Mexico, where it is produced with chemicals imported from China and India. The boat strikes also drew intense criticism following the revelation that the military killed survivors of the very first boat attack with a follow-up strike. The Trump administration and many Republican lawmakers said it was legal and necessary, while Democratic lawmakers and legal experts said the killings were murder, if not a war crime. Child, 11 soldiers killed after blast at security post. A suicide bomber backed by a group of gunmen rammed an explosive-laden vehicle into the wall of a security post after troops signaled for it to stop in a former Pakistani Taliban stronghold in northwest Pakistan, causing part of the compound to collapse, killing 11 soldiers and a child, the military and police said Tuesday. The military said nearby civilian homes were heavily damaged in the blast, killing a young girl and wounding 7 other civilians, including women and children. Inflation falls to 2.3% in January. Statistics Canada reports drop in gas and housing costs, by Craig Lord. Statistics Canada says lower prices at the pump and easing shelter inflation helped rein in the pressure facing consumers in January. The agency said Tuesday that the annual rate of inflation ticked down to 2.3% last month. Economists had expected inflation to hold steady at 2.4%. Statistics Canada said gas prices were 16.7% lower year over year in January, largely thanks to the end of the consumer carbon price in April. That decline helped offset food inflation, which accelerated to 7.3% annually in January. Statistics Canada said a jump of 12.3% in the cost of restaurant meals year over year drove the increase. That surge was mostly tied to the federal government's, quote, tax holiday, taking full effect a year earlier. January 2025 marked the only full month of Ottawa's temporary tax reprieve, which removed a portion of the sales tax on dining out in a variety of goods, and annual comparisons are somewhat distorted as a result. Prices for alcohol, children's clothes, toys, and games also jumped year over year due to the tax holiday effect. Costs for food from the grocery store, meanwhile, rose 4.8% annually in January, slowing from a price hike of 5% in December. Statistics Canada said prices for fresh fruit fell 3.1% in the months as stable growing seasons in producer regions eased prices for berries, oranges, and melons. Shelter inflation, long a stubborn fuel in the Consumer Price Index, has also continued its easing path to start the year. Slower price growth for rent and mortgage interest rate costs meant shelter prices rose 1.7% annually in January. The first time in almost 5 years this figure has been below 2%. Leslie Preston, TD's senior economist, said in a note to clients Tuesday that the January inflation report is consistent with the bank's view that price pressures will continue to moderate throughout the year as past inflation problem areas like rents continue to cool. Preston said the Bank of Canada's measures of underlying inflation cooled in January, and core metrics were running below the central bank's 2% target on a 3-month basis. Statistics Canada's January price report marks the Bank of Canada's first look at inflation data since the central bank held its benchmark interest rate steady at 2.2% last month. The Bank of Canada will get another look at inflation dynamics for February before its next decision on March 18th. Ontario gambling regulator moves to suspend PointsBet. Company blames human error for not flagging suspicious activity. By Anastasia Blosser. In a first for the province, Ontario's gaming regulator wants to temporarily suspend an online sports book, alleging it failed to flag suspicious bets tied to a 2024 game-fixing scandal involving a former Toronto Raptors player. The Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario has issued a notice proposing a 5-day suspension of PointsBet Canada's online gaming registration. The regulator says the company failed to properly monitor, detect, document, and report unusual betting activity connected to the case. In July 2024, former Raptor Jonte Porter admitted he took himself out of games, claiming illness or injury, so a group of bettors could cash in on wagers that depended on him underperforming. He pleaded guilty to a federal conspiracy charge in a U.S. court after receiving a lifetime ban from the NBA. After reports of insider betting surfaced in early 2024, the AGCO asked all provincially regulated sports books whether they had offered bets on Porter and whether they had spotted or reported anything suspicious. PointsBet replied, after what the AGCO described as significant delay, that it had not offered those types of bets. In October, a U.S. Department of Justice indictment revealed the Porter case was part of a larger insider betting scheme, and the AGCO contacted the sportsbook again. This time, PointsBet told the regulator that Porter-related bets had in fact been available on its site 18 months after its original response. The AGCO said there were suspicious bets placed on PointsBet that were central to the scheme and should have been reported. Regulated iGaming operators act as a critical first line of defense in protecting the integrity of sport in Ontario's sports betting market, the AGCO wrote in a media release, adding that by reporting suspicious betting activity, sports betting sites help warn sports leagues, integrity monitors, regulators, and law enforcement around the world. Safeguarding the integrity of sports in Ontario's sports betting market is a top priority for the AGCO, the regulator's CEO Karen Schnarr said. Our regulatory framework is clear. Operators must be equipped to detect and effectively respond to integrity risks, and we will take appropriate action when these standards are not met. The AGCO also noted this isn't the first time PointsBet had faced penalties since it began operations in Ontario in 2022. It was fined for advertising and inducement-related violations in May 22, and PointsBet Canada is disappointed by the AGCO's decision to propose a 5-day suspension of its operator registration. They respectfully believe the proposed sanction is disproportionate given the circumstances. Ontario has strict requirements for protecting the integrity of the betting market and will step in to act if those requirements are not being upheld, an AGCO spokesperson told The Star. PointsBet Canada said its failure to report the Porter-related bets was caused by an initial inaccurate response in March of 2024 caused by human error during an organizational transition, not any intent to withhold information. A spokesperson added that once the betting data was discovered, it was immediately disclosed to the AGCO, and PointsBet cooperated with the investigation, working proactively with the regulator. PointsBet Canada is disappointed by the AGCO's decision to propose a 5-day suspension of our operator registration, they said. PointsBet has 15 days to appeal the proposed suspension to an independent body within the tribunals, Ontario. Ontario to fast-track Great Bear gold mine. Province says Kinross Gold investing $5 billion in project expected to create 1,000 jobs. Ontario is fast-tracking the approval process for Kinross Gold's $5 billion Great Bear mine in remote northwestern Ontario as the province works to get critical minerals to market sooner. Citing global economic uncertainty amid the Trump trade war, Energy and Mining Minister Stephen Leckie said the project near Red Lake, a 3-hour drive north of Kenora, will be eligible for Ontario's streamlined permit application system. We're sending a message that we can be bold, we can be ambitious, we can move with speed, we can do it with national interest, he told a news conference Tuesday. Moving quickly to approve new projects is key to attracting investment to Ontario, Leckie said. Great Bear is a combined open pit and underground mine in development. It has the potential to produce an average of 500,000 ounces of gold annually at its peak. The province said Toronto-based Kinross is investing $5 billion in the operation, expected to create 1,000 jobs and hundreds in its construction phase, with the mine to be built out over 2 years, starting in 2027, and production beginning in 2029. Work on connecting to electricity transmission lines and a natural gas pipeline is underway. Under the fast-tracking, known as One Project, One Approval, Kinross will have one point of contact with the province on all necessary permits in a process designed to reduce review time by half. The province pledged that its duty to consult with Indigenous communities remains fully upheld. Fast-tracking approvals is an important milestone for the project, said Kinross Chief Executive J. Paul Rowlandson, who added that the mine is positioned to become one of Canada's largest and most profitable gold mines. He promised significant economic and employment benefits for Indigenous communities, among others. According to the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, The project would produce up to 60,000 tons of ore per day, with a mill metal processing up to 15,000 tons daily over about 20 years. Indigenous peoples and the public can apply for funding to participate in the federal assessment of the project until Friday. Kinross acquired the Great Bear project 4 years ago, raising concerns about pollution to the south in Grassy Narrows, where a pulp and paper mill in the 1960s dumped tons of mercury into the Wabigoon River, contaminating fish and the people who ate them. Kinross said last July that sulfate concentrations to be discharged from the Great Bear mine would not be harmful to the environment. Canada's Homan scored 2 in the 10th for a huge win over Sweden's Hasselborg. Sweden's Anna Hasselborg qualified for the playoffs at the Winter Olympics on Tuesday despite falling to Canada. Rachel Homan took a big step towards joining her with an 86 victory at Cortina Curling Olympic Stadium. Homan made an end-changing triple takeout in the 8th and took advantage of a Sweden miss in the 9th to improve to 43. Canada iced it with a deuce in the 10th end to hand Sweden 61 its first defeat of the competition. "You never know what game is going to matter in the round robin," said Canada coach Heather Neoden. "So, yeah, they're all must-wins." A loss to Sweden would have been a major hit for Canada's playoff hopes. Instead, Homan's Ottawa-based rink is tied for 4th place with 2 games to play. Homan, Tracy Fleury, Emma Miskew, and Sarah Wilkes have reeled off 3 straight wins after a 13 start and a weekend loaded with distractions. The top 4 teams in the 10-field cut will advance to the semifinals Friday afternoon. "We feel like we're battling and we're resilient," Miskew said. "We're trying to make sure that we continue to put as much pressure on as we can." Homan was scheduled to play Stefania Constantini of host Italy on Wednesday instead of her round-robin finale against South Korea's Eunji Kim on Thursday. The latter matchup could determine the final playoff entry. "Every game here is huge for us," Homan said. "We have to keep playing our game and keep staying within ourselves." Switzerland's Silviana Tirinzoni beat South Korea 75 on Tuesday, and American Tabitha Peterson dumped Denmark's Madeleine Dupont 103. That left the U.S. and Switzerland tied in 2nd place behind Sweden at 52. The Canada-Sweden game came after a tense matchup between the countries in the men's draw on Friday night. Vice skips Mark Kennedy and Oscar Eriksson had a profanity-laced exchange about double-touching stones that went viral. Homan got involved Saturday after World Curling assigned umpires to monitor the hog line area where stones are released. An umpire pulled Homan's first stone in a loss to Switzerland that night due to double touching. "It's illegal to touch the granite port of the rock after the handle is released." Homan denied there was contact and called the decision to remove the stone absurd. Great Britain's Bobby Lammy had a stone pulled Sunday for double touching, and World Curling reversed course for the next session, reverting back to its original umpire setup. Temperatures were much lower for the Canada-Sweden matchup between veteran women's teams that know each other well. Sweden took its own first lead in the 5th end after Homan missed a double takeout and knocked her own stone out of the house. Hasselborg made a hit to score 3 points for a 43 advantage. After exchanging singles, Homan seemed uncertain about trying a triple takeout in the 8th end. Miskew talked her into it, and the skip delivered with a powerful hit that cleared all 3 Swedish stones and left Canada sitting with 2. "Having that high-weight ability to make rocks, many rocks, move is exceptional," Nedoen said. Canada shot 83% overall, while Sweden was at 73%. Hasselborg had a chance for a deuce in the 9th end, but settled for a single when her rock rolled out. That gave Canada a hammer coming home in a tie game, and Homan made a nose hit for the deuce. "We just try to take advantage whenever we can of getting any sort of break," Miskew said. Canada hasn't won Olympic women's team gold since Jennifer Jones was victorious at the 2014 Games in Sochi, Russia. Olympic briefs. Biathlon. France upsets Norway for gold. France went from last place on the first leg to being first on the last lap to secure the country's first Olympic gold medal in men's biathlon relay, upsetting defending champion Norway, while Sweden was able to hang on for the bronze. World Cup champion Eric Perrault, skiing the final leg for France, missed 2 shots in his last standing shooting bout and was only 7 seconds ahead of Norway's Velte Sejani Christensen as they headed out to the ski tracks packed with fresh snow. Perrault stayed ahead of the Christensen and took his team of Fabien Claude, Emilien Jacquelin, and Quentin Fillon-Maillet across the line first for a total time of 1 hour, 19 minutes, and 55.2 seconds. Christensen finished 9.8 seconds back for silver, and Sebastian Samuelsson was 57.5 seconds behind France for the bronze. Skeleton. Ukrainian racer gets $200,000 gift. The Ukrainian skeleton racer who was disqualified from the games for his tribute helmet was given a gift of more than $200,000 to help keep competing and advocating for his country. Vladislav Herishevsky was barred from competition last week because he insisted on wearing a helmet of memory, adorned with images of more than 20 Ukrainian athletes and coaches killed during the country's war with Russia. Ukrainian businessperson Rinat Amatov, owner of Shakhtar Donetsk Soccer Club and the Azovstal Works in Mariupol, gave the money to Herishevsky from his charity foundation. The amount is equal to what the country's Olympic gold medalists would get. Skiing. Another golden race for Oftebro. Norway's Jens Laras Loftbo turned on the afterburners and galloped uphill past his rivals on the 10-kilometer cross-country ski race to claim his second straight gold medal in Nordic combined. Johannes Lamparter of Austria, who finished second behind Oftebro in the normal hill event, won his second silver, and Aiken Herola of Finland, who had not medaled before in taking part in 4 Olympics, got bronze. North on the road, south in the standings. Ice Dogs suffer back-to-back lopsided losses on their road trip. When Niagara Ice Dogs boarded the bus for Family Day weekend trip to North Bay and Sudbury, they were also hoping to go north in the Ontario Hockey League standings. Instead, much to their chagrin, they went south, suffering back-to-back setbacks against teams they needed to pass if they wanted to have a home ice advantage in the opening round of the playoffs for the first time in 7 years. For the Ice Dogs, lopsided losses to Central Division rivals, the North Bay Battalion, 9-1 on Sunday, and the Sudbury Wolves, 6-2 on Monday, were missed opportunities to gain ground in the race for the Eastern Conference playoff seeding. A breakdown in the defensive zone was cited by Niagara head coach Chris Barch as a contributing factor in both games. "We've got to be better in front of our goalies as a 5-man unit, but they, goalies Charlie Robertson and Vladislav Yermolenko, needed to be better." Barch said it was unfortunate for Robertson in his start against the Battalion, his former team. 3 pucks were off deflections, 2 of them off of our players, 1 of them off of theirs. Charlie did have a rough start to that one, and Yermolenko, 3 goals on 11 shots, he said. "We had such a great goaltending from them." It was unusual 2 games, but for any team it's very difficult to push back trailing 3-0 after the first period. The Niagara lineup, already depleted with injuries to forwards Chase Hull and Ryan Robruck, lost forward Noah Reed and defenseman Liam Spencer to the flu before the North Bay game. "It is that time of year. We lost Reed and Spencer to illness for both games," Barch said. "They were not able to take the bus home with us from Sudbury, so that was a big loss." Spencer has turned himself into a top 4D defenseman, consistent in the lineup every night, won 7+ minutes. Reed plays on the team's top line along with Riley Patterson and Ethan Zazat. He's done a real good job with the work component, Barch said of Reed, a St. Catharines native and an Anaheim Ducks draft pick. Niagara's confidence in winning at least one game over the weekend was buoyed somewhat by recent history. The Ice Dogs left St. Catharines having beaten Sudbury in all 3 previous games while splitting 4 games with North Bay in head-to-head play. That history didn't even come close to repeating itself on the weekend, with Niagara trailing North Bay 7-0 and Sudbury 4-0 before finding the back of the net. Riley Patterson scored in both games, while Jacob Monks had other goals against Sudbury. The Ice Dogs were outshot 30-27 by Sudbury, but had a 45-37 advantage at North Bay. Niagara finished 2 for 5 on the power play against the Wolves and 0 for 5 against the Battalion. On Family Day, Niagara's starting goaltender was replaced before the first intermission for the second game in a row. Yermolenko, a rookie, was pulled after surrendering 3 goals on 11 shots. In North Bay the day before, Robertson, an overager, got the hook after the Battalion took a 3-0 lead on their first 6 shots. Sunday's loss to North Bay was the team's most lopsided of the 25-6 season. It was also its most goals allowed since giving up 7 to North Bay on December 14th in St. Catharines. A stretch of 4 road games for the Ice Dogs continues Friday when they visit the Ottawa 67s. They visit the Kingston Frontenacs the following afternoon before their next game at Meridian Center on Thursday, February 26th against the Erie Otters. The number 1 priority at practice this week, preparing for Ottawa? Most definitely our D zone, Barch answered. When you give up 9 goals and then you give up 6 in the next game, that's not just representative of who we are and indicative of the work that we put in. D zone will be a very, very heavy focus for us this week. Niagara's goal, with 14 games remaining in the regular season schedule, is a top 4 finish in the Eastern Conference. That would give the Ice Dogs home ice advantage in the opening round of the playoffs for the first time since 2018-19, when they entered the postseason as the 2nd seed and defeated North Bay in the quarterfinals before being upset by the Oshawa Generals in the next round. The Ice Dogs, currently 6th in the 10-team conference, with a 26-23-41 record, entered the week trailing the 4th-place Peterborough Petes by 8 points and 5th-place North Bay by 4. Kingston and Sudbury trail Niagara by 5 and 9 points respectively. Dog Biscuit center Ryerson Edgar, Niagara's top pick in the 2025 OHL draft and 5th among rookie scorers in the league, has committed to the University of Michigan. Niagara and North Bay each have 4 National Hockey League prospects on their rosters, while Sudbury has 2. Battalion defenseman Hayden Barch, 18, the eldest son of Niagara head coach Chris, collected an assist for North Bay. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 18th, 2026 issue of Niagara Falls Review. We read from the Niagara Falls Review every Sunday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Jean. Thank you for listening.